oh my God, I would never want to be in that situation. So I don't know. I thought it was very interesting in the way that it kind of put you in a morally interesting spot thinking about it.
Kind of goes along with the, sorry, I needed to start recording. I forgot. Like the assisted suicide argument that we kind of have nowadays too, in a way.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. All right. I'm closer. I'm getting no, I love first of all, I love to hear when people actually enjoy the books, and it breaks my heart when people don't like them. I feel so embarrassed, and I know I really shouldn't, but I I love the positivity. But I also love
I
when we all band together and hate a book. So
I definitely think the writing was a little bit weird in the respect of the way that it bounced around, because it's trying to give you different perspectives, but sometimes it was hard to follow which husband was with who and where
mm,
it sat in the timeline, even though it was giving you dates as it went through. I felt that was a little bit hard, but I really kept getting pulled back in because of the morally like gray of what would I do kind of
yeah,
thing. And also I don't want to ever be in that position to think about that.
no, no, yeah, no. Mm-mm. Cool. Well, I'm so glad. I'm so glad, and I did hear a couple of comments about the writing. Maybe some people were saying it was a little too dry. But we can see what Angela has to say. Angela, sell it to me. How was this book for you?
I dug it. Maybe I'm in like a man-hating mood right now or something, but I was like, kill them all, Like, yeah, get them.
Yeah.
I Side note, why did nobody kill Lewis? Like, to me, he was the number one. Like, I would have taken him out immediately. He was a piece of shit. So, yeah, that was the only thing I really didn't get. Like, why did he live to like die naturally? But she's right. The baby stuff was a little difficult, but you did kind of understand, like, especially this poor woman, like the stuff that she was going through, like, and being in her position. I don't know. I kind of got it a little bit. Um, and she felt so guilty about it, and I felt bad for her. But I liked the kind of narrative style of it. I liked that it wasn't just facts. Like, the Chernobyl book was like a whole lot of facts. And this kind of presented it a little smoother. It was dry at parts. Like, there was maybe some times where there didn't need to be quite so much description of things. Um, Sometimes it got to be a little much. Um, but I kept reading it. I didn't. Sometimes I have to switch to audiobook because I am like, I can't focus on this just reading it. But I made it through this one without having to also purchase the audiobook. Um, so I liked it.
Sweet.
But once again, like, kill all men. So that's just kidding. I'm not kidding.
I love it. Yeah, I think I was on my friend's podcast, our bookish notes, and I told her, she asked me to promote the book club, and she was like, okay, what are we reading for the month of July? And I told her, I don't know if the episode is out yet, but I told her what it kind of loosely what it was about, and she was like, oh, well, good for her. I was like, it's the general consensus. You told me last, Melina. Oh, thank God. Welcome back. I'm so happy you came back.
Yeah, you're so good. Like, see, you guessed it right the first time. You guessed it right the second time. Now it's like fully cemented in your
Natural.
head.
What do you
So
think?
I'm a little bit with Angela on the whole, like, kind of, I don't know if it's like man hating, but like realistically, if these things had happened to these women in today's time, they would have had more resources to get out of the situations they were in,
Sure.
realistically. Like, to have an abusive husband, to be able to get out of some situations where they were being abused by like even their like father-in-laws, like those situations, they wouldn't have had to deal with it. And even the fact that they were all put on trial for what they did, while I don't necessarily condone like, hey, let's murder them and then try and cover it up, but like, what else could they do? Like,
Right.
they're the ones taking care of their children. in a lot of these cases. They're the ones that are trying to hold their families together, especially in situations where, you know, their husbands are drunkards. So I kind of felt like in some cases they just really didn't feel like they had a lot that they could do different.
Yeah.
And yeah, with the infant part, like that's really hard. That was hard to read. But also like reading it, I think the thing that kept me interested was like, wow, this is like a real thing that happened. So this isn't this isn't just like a make believe kind of thing. This is a real thing that happened. I'm with pretty much everybody else on like the writing style wasn't like the easiest to follow. I think I had an easier time of it because so I live in Phoenix. It's like 120 every day. So like essentially like there's nothing to do but stay inside and like read. So I just read it in like a 2-day span. So all the times where you're jumping around in storylines, that part is really difficult to kind of keep track of who relates to who and what goes with what. But
Sure.
even like reading it in a 2-day span, like sometimes I would be like, okay, so where does this fit in the storyline? And that's where it's kind of difficult because you're trying to keep these different storylines together and not necessarily being able to follow where everything is. Like especially like Petra, like I forgot who she was near the end. Like I don't remember who this relates to until I had to like go back through and I'm like, oh yeah, like I feel bad for her. She had really no culpability in this, but she's getting dragged into all this situation. So that's the part of the writing that I found difficult.
Yeah.
Even though I kind of read it in a short amount of time, is you're jumping around in a bunch of different storylines from a bunch of different people's perspectives, and you're having to keep all of that straight. So that's where I found it difficult. But I enjoyed the fact that it was one, a real story, and two, like thinking about that concept of if this had happened in today's times, like this would be a far different situation for all of these women.
Absolutely. And I think it's so interesting too, and I don't really know the statistics or actual facts of this, but when it comes to women murderers, how a lot of the times it's more sneaky like this. And at the time, I think too, it's interesting because to my knowledge, a good amount of them probably, I mean, they say at least 160 men. They don't know. Like I mean, it's so they got away with it too, essentially. I'm assuming some of them did. Maybe not Aunt Susie in the end, but it's so interesting that sometimes with men it's like an act of rage and anger, but with women they like are meticulous about it. Love it. I did want to say there's a book that came to mind while we were talking. Make sure there's not rolling over any cats. I got this a while ago, and my mom and I started listening to the audio book. I can't remember what time period this is, but it's kind of interesting. Wish it would tell me what year. Oh, this is actually way prior to 1920. It looks like mid 1800s, late 1800s, but also interesting topic. The divorce colony, about women having to travel to South Dakota to get divorces because that wasn't allowed. And I think South Dakota was one of like the first places that allowed that. So if you're interested in topics like that, what we were reading or listening to on the drive was pretty good. Pretty good. My mom keeps asking me for a copy of that book. Christina, how are the wheels? Do you have it yet? Or are you waiting for them to fix it?
I will. Yeah, I'm going to be getting a call from the shop
Good.
to bring it in, and then I'll have a rental from them while they fix the cosmetic stuff and put on the extras that they're giving me because they fucked it up.
That's what the fuck?
But I mean, I was also without a car for at least 4 months earlier this year because I backed into a car in a parking lot. So I also get that like shit happens and people make mistakes. And
was it bad, like super noticeable, or was it like a ding?
I mean, it seems more like it's scraped.
No.
Yeah, but it wasn't as big as it was in my mind. I mean, in my mind, it was taller than the car is. So actually seeing it in person was just tiny amounts of things. And
That's crazy though. Well, I'm so happy you got it though. We are both now part of the Cross Track gang.
yeah,
I wish I could see that in person, man. I've only seen pictures of that orange color, but I'm sure it's absolutely gorgeous.
oh yeah, like I had come there obsessed with so many of their other colors, and then one in the orange drove up, and I was like, never mind. All of your other colors suck.
Yeah, that's the one. That's the one I want there. Thank you. Well, I'm so happy for you. So excited. She sent us some pictures of it in the Discord of it, and I mean, I've already put, I think 2,500 miles on the Crosstrek since I got it. I keep driving that damn thing everywhere. I love it. I love her.
Yeah, I went to go see my mom yesterday, and it's already hit its first 100 miles. So
Yay! So exciting. So tell me, what's going on? What'd you think? Loved it? Hated it?
in the middle.
Okay. Love that. Tell me why.
So the thing that really stood out to me, especially in nonfiction books, the first thing I look for is that list of references. So like, I want to know where you got your facts. And so looking at the back and seeing that it was just one page with a lot of things where she's like, Kiss Herlop, selected articles. Kiss Ushchuk, selected articles. New York Times, selected articles. I'm like, you're not even going to tell me what articles, just the New York Times in those 3 years. Like, okay, I can't replicate your research without spending a week in a library. So that kind of always makes me then start being like, okay, I'm going to take everything with a grain of salt.
Yeah. She says it's not even a complete record of all the works and sources I've consulted.
Yeah.
Bummer.
And then we get this character pretty early on. He's like the new doctor that's assigned to this village and some other villages. And he comes in and is all like, I want to get rid of all of the midwives. I hate midwives. And now all of a sudden, all of these midwives are involved in a giant murder ring, and fat evil Aunt Susie's at the center of it. And I'm just like, is this as big of a thing as they're claiming it is, or are these women, especially these Romani midwives, scapegoats so that they can kill off these traditions in these villages?
Mm-hmm. Got it.
Because I'm like, I totally get where all of these women are coming from. If everything happened the way that it's written out as happening, I get it. I would have killed their husbands too. And I'm guessing that when it came time for the infant stuff, that a lot of that happened because these are women who didn't have access to birth control or other ways of preventing the pregnancies. And then it's like, okay, well, I can choose between me and all of my kids dying or this one kid that I never wanted to have.
Right.
And it's like, it's one of those impossible decisions.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I could see where all of them were coming from, but I also have a healthy dose of skepticism just because we've got these big main characters who are just like, I want to kill the traditions of all of the Romani in these areas. And hey, look, the Romanis have a giant murder ring.
Yeah.
Weird.
Interesting. Okay. But there were some positives to it. If you were a little halfway.
Yeah, like it's well written. Like it's more novel, like it's more like nonfiction narrative.
Oh, okay.
So I feel like it's an easy one to get through, and it's very interesting. Although I definitely agree with everyone who came before me that you get these people mixed up, and I'm already horrible with names to begin with, and then we've got like 5 people with names that are like one letter off from each other, and I'm just like, which one were you?
I hate when people do that in fiction too. Like when it comes to fiction, like I understand that even in my friend groups, there are some people who have names similar. So it's not unrealistic to do that. And maybe it is a little bit more unrealistic to like have them all have different, but at the same time, I'm like, why doesn't everybody just a slightly different name than everybody else? Like instead of a Kate and a Kaylee, like how about we have a Kate and a Patricia? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Or just give me a list of characters at the beginning or a family tree.
See, and you know what? And Melina was talking about it earlier too, and at the same time, I'm like, I would love that, but would I ever reference it, and would I ever be able to still keep up with it? Like, I feel like it'd be just a little bit better, maybe to give us a name and just like a little brief, like about section, married to this person, like that would probably help.
Yeah, I've definitely, especially when you get into the really big, deep, epic fantasies, they have those, and I'm like, I love you. Like, you're gonna give me a giant list of all of these people and how they're connected and where they live, and here's a picture. I'm like, thank you.
I love that. And there was a sci-fi book that I did take to McKay's recently because I opened it, and the first 2 pages were just characters, and I'm like, okay, well, this might be a little too much. Give me 1 second. Do you want to say something to him, honey?
Huh?
Do you want to say something to him?
No.
You're making me laugh.
I'm sorry.
He has his microphone. How do I show y'all this? Where's a pen? I keep seeing Chris over there going. So just say it. You're good? Okay. I'm sorry. She was talking about infants, and I'm over here giggling because Chris is making me laugh. Anyway. Hey, Haley. Hello, friend. We're not driving tonight. We're home. Yay. I do
Yes.
every time. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I am not going to be the one to sell you on this book.
All good?
Oh, it was a bit of a drag for me. It was very much like narrative, but I think a lot of us in the Discord had mentioned
Yeah.
if I read Auntie Susie waddled one more damn time, I was about to lose it. And I know it's such a nitpicky thing, but I know someone in the Discord actually checked to see how many times the word waddle was used or waddled. It was like 23 times or something excessive. So I was like, okay, I read through the whole thing. I finished it yesterday. Honestly, the end was the most interesting part of the whole book for me, like the last chapter, because I feel like that's where she really talked about like what happened in terms of the actual court cases and like how things turned out, what the actual crimes were. Because I
Right.
feel like a lot of it felt kind of like fluff in a sense, where I was kind of like, do I really need to know that Auntie Susie waddled to the baker's place for some bread and wine? No. So that for me, it was just like, it focused a lot on her weight, that past the point of it being descriptive for me to picture Auntie Susie, it was kind of just like, okay, do we need to bring up how plump she is every single time she's mentioned? I get the point. And I was like, okay, I'll give her a little bit of grace, because when I got to the very end of the book, it did say this is her first novel she's written. So I was like, oh, okay. But then I saw she's written articles for like New York Times, I think a few other newspapers. And I'm kind of like, okay, for someone who has written in multiple newspapers, you would think her sources would be better than, oh, multiple articles. And oh, this isn't a comprehensive list of everything I used.
Yeah,
So,
that's weird.
yeah. So it was just not it for me. Like, I think the actual cases and the situation that was going on, very, very interesting topic. Very much I wanted more of the meat. I wanted to know more about like, okay, what's actually going on with the crimes.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel like we got much of that.
Bummer. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
somebody said too that in the end, and I was trying to find the waddle count, was it 23? I think somebody said it was 23.
Yeah, it was 23.
My God. Yeah, and somebody on TikTok said, I've used the word waddle like 400 times more than usual after reading this.
Yeah.
Somebody it was like in the acknowledgements or something that Aunt Susie was constantly getting like berated after her death, and like these negative comments were being used after her death, and somebody pointed out was like, well, haven't you been doing that for the past like 300 pages, calling her like plump and saying she waddled everywhere like a like, you know, the school admissions advisor? Like, what? I mean, I don't understand where you're going. And that's why I kind of compared it to another 18 tiny death situation where we read about that one lady, and of course I can't even remember her name, because the whole time it was just she was being steamrolled by the other men in the book, and then at the end it was similar. And I'm like, well, you just did that. Like, you just, the whole book was about the men in her life, and you spent maybe a fourth of it talking about her accomplishments and how amazing she was. It's like, well, now I don't, and that's why, that's also a big thing too as to why I really didn't want, because I just didn't want to hear about just somebody being just, I mean, maybe she was a good person, maybe she's a bad person, I don't know. Again, morally gray, but I don't know. I didn't feel like getting into it after that. So cool. Thank you. Joanna, how are you? How's Hank? Here's my Hank. He's reaching for me. Hello, baby.
Hank is good. I am right now cat sitting at a friend's, and one of the cats has a terminal lung illness, and it makes me very sad.
Yeah.
Because I've cat sat for her for years and I love her. So, and she's
Aw.
right over there where you can't see her. Anyway, so I just want to second the people who say they wanted a list of characters and a family tree. That is a good looking cat, Patches.
It's our little Hank.
Yeah. He's Hank
sweetie.
too, right?
Yep.
Hank Brown, and mine is Hank Brown.
Yes.
So the other thing was, to me, this did not feel anything like a nonfiction book, something like the Chernobyl book did. I mean, this didn't have any footnotes, very limited references, and it wasn't written like a nonfiction book. Like, it opens up saying the opening is Anna is lying on the floor trying to give birth, and it talks about how she was all sweaty and the sweat was dripping in her eyes and this. I mean, that's bullshit. What she should have said was childbirth in the early 20th century in Hungary was a very fraught situation because of malnutrition. Frequently, the new moms had no milk. And instead, I mean, it's like someone said, nitpicky. I felt so nitpicky, but every single page I'm saying, this is not nonfiction. This is a story that you have completely made up.
Yeah.
And in the author's note, she says something about how she had to assume certain things and create certain situations, but she did it with the utmost respect for the story. And I'm thinking, no. Every other page you're talking about how much dust is in the creases of their clothes, and how much rust is flaking off something. And it's just, I was just very angry.
Yeah.
Not angry. Yeah, I was angry. I was like, this is crazy.
Yeah, there's a couple of books out there that really confuse me when it comes to like fictitious versions of like the Lizzie Borden murders.
Yeah.
Like, why? Like, what's the reason? I know you want the pizza. I know you want the pizza. You can't have one.
And I agree that, doing it that way does bring more personality, and it makes you able to figure out who is who and whatever, but it just came across as a story. It did not come across as a nonfiction book.
Right. And sometimes I really like when they're like weaving a little bit of a tale. Weaving a little bit of a tale for you, as long as it's factual. But the second they start like going off, about, some of this I had to just kind of make up. It's like, well, now I don't care.
Right.
Now I don't want to be a part of this.
Yeah. Did you like it? Oh, you didn't read it. Never mind.
I didn't even touch. I was seeing people's comments on Discord, and it just immediately turned me off, because the last thing I want right now is like just this kind of shisty written book where the women aren't even really respected. And that was like this was, part of this was just the empowerment of it, right?
Yeah.
Women kind of
I don't know how Discord works, and I've tried to figure it out, so I might need a
even know.
tutorial.
It's so confusing, and we have like the bare bones. I've joined a couple of, oh, is that itching? I've joined a couple of discords that are so intricate, and like there's roles and there's rules, and you have to, and I'm like, okay, here's a channel about books, here's a channel about your food, here's a channel about your cats. Ta-da! I'm not doing anything else special with it, so I can definitely show you. But it is kind of confusing, and then the notifications get a little crazy. I keep them on because I got to keep track of everything, but I understand why people have left. We've lost like at least 20 people in the past month or so, but that's just how it is. And Mariah.
I would firstly like to say thank you for picking this book out, even though it turned out the way it did. I was very excited to read it based on the cover, the description, but like as Joanna said, it just felt very fictionalized. Like it felt like diary entries without it being firsthand accounts, which at some point I started to like think, why do I care about these entries? And it was just too many people and too many things going on. And then like she talked about someone who's not producing milk, and then someone whose kid has like a very bad illness but didn't want to die because of the poisoning. And I'm just like, can we stay here for a second? Let's talk about this guy, because like that was interesting. And then as soon as I got interested, she would move away. So I'm like, this is like very hard to get into. And as Joanna said, there was no footnotes, so it felt very falsified and like fictionalized. So it's just like, oh, I kept forgetting this is stuff that actually happened to people. And I'm like, oh, this is fiction, but why would she choose to do this? And there's like, no, this really happened to people, quote unquote. So it was hard for me to like bridge the gap of like these were actual people going through something, because the way she wrote it didn't feel like people.
Yeah, like, does she have to say that in her acknowledgments, or is she just like telling on herself? Like, is there like a rule in those sort of books where she has to be like, by the way?
I mean, as a person who like worked in publishing, you kind of do have to say your sources and like where you get things from.
Sure.
So like the fact that her source page was very sparse did say like she told on herself with like the lack of research she did, and just like no footnotes, no accounts for anything at all.
Which is so funny. We were talking about Midnight in Chernobyl. Jungle Gym. I had to actually mark it off. Do you see the blue on like the last third or fourth of the book? That is where well, that's the epilogue. And then the acknowledgments, author's note, the glossary. Okay, that's important. Units of radiation, notes. The notes literally are this much of the book. It is, oh my God, my boob. It is so much of the book that I literally had to mark it off so I would like act like I'm making progress in it, because I kept looking like, oh my God, like I haven't made a dent in this book. I'm getting
Come on. Come here.
He wants my pizza.
Come here.
Go to Dad, please.
Come on.
Just looking at him like
Bowie.
anyway.
There you go, Bowie.
I actually did wind up finishing that one, and it was very good. So, but so interested to hear more about your previous life in publication, Mariah, as well. I have questions.
I'm always happy to answer questions about the very turbulent world and very odd world that is publishing.
Are you in the Discord? Are you in the Discord?
I am, yes.
Okay, cool. I'll be sure to at you and be like,
anyone who has any publishing questions ever, let me know. But you have to you have to say your sources, and
sure,
they have to look real, and it didn't feel real, which is sad because the topic is so fruitful and like so interesting. And it felt like she was kind of like globbing things together and seeing if they would stick together and throwing them at the wall, hoping people would be interesting, which is something in itself.
Sure. Yeah, and that seemed to be the consent, which also just fed into the idea of me not really wanting to even pick it up. So I think I bought it too and noticed on Goodreads it had like a 3.3, which is not technically a bad rating, but on Goodreads it's like not the best. So we are off to a great start. Cool. Megan.
Somebody brought this up a little bit earlier, and I thought it was interesting, where the young doctor that comes in, there's like a chapter, I believe, where he talks about how, wanting to get rid of the midwives and having nurses go to school and that all existing. And then he has to help Anna with her birth for the first birth that he's ever been a part of as a full-fledged doctor, because they didn't do that.
Right.
And she's hemorrhaging and bleeding out. And the whole time he's like, oh, that's a you problem. Like, sounds like it's just you and not. And then he goes and talks to other male doctors, and all of them say the same thing of basically like, yeah, no, that's them. Like, what? But it very much showcased the difference between having midwives there versus doctors of that time period, and what they actually were capable of and what they were familiar with. And birth, especially, or anything dealing with reproductive with women, was not it.
Yeah, does this mention at all why the chainsaw was invented? Wasn't that having something to do, that had something to do with childbirth too? Didn't it?
They did not talk about it for this, but yeah, this was more, he was specifically talking about wanting to get rid of just like I think he calls them, he doesn't call them witches, but he calls them something like that, like something that's more derogatory of not a midwife or what you would think of as a midwife. It's like charlatan level. That's what he's referring to them as. And he wants trained nurses, but the whole time he's helping Anna give birth, and she almost dies because he has absolutely no clue what he's doing. And he's still degrading.
Come on.
Well, yeah, it was so bizarre. Like, the whole interlude was so weird. And he's like, well, yeah, no, it was her fault. The other doctors agreed that it was her, but he didn't notice that she was hemorrhaging and why she was hemorrhaging.
Oh, every day I just know motherhood is not for me. Hey, honey, do you know why the chainsaw was invented?
No.
You want to know?
Sure.
1780, two Scottish doctors invented the prototype of the chainsaw, not to cut down trees or clear debris. No, John Atkin and James Jaffrey invented the hand-cranking chainsaw to cut through the pelvises of delivering mothers who were having trouble pushing their babies out.
Oh my God. I'll never look at a blade another. Jeez, oh, good Lord.
It's just, what? I think this is why women poison their hut. Like, people are just mad, man. Like, I can't. Oh,
Pelvis.
it's your pelvis. What is she saying, friends? Like, no uterus, no opinion. Melina.
I agree with like the narrative fiction thing being a little bit, I don't know. So I appreciated the narrative fiction. I will say that. However, I do agree that the lack of footnotes and the citations and the references do make it feel a lot more contrived. I read this book, which I'll mention that maybe when we get later in. It's called Unexampled Courage. It's very, very good, but there's 30 pages of notes and references in this book. It has a similar vibe to it where it feels very like narrative fiction, but you can tell just based on the notes and the references that this author used that he was using like journal entries, history, things that were documentation, like court case records, like so some similar things that this author, Patty McCracken, would have used, like court documents, right? And what's interesting is like this was written by a judge, so you'd think that he would have a harder time with narrative fiction. But right. Like you can do narrative fiction well and have it be cited and referenced and have it be where it feels like a true story and and isn't contrived feeling
Yeah.
when it has the proper references. So I just wanted to kind of mention that
Yeah,
because
please do.
I read both this month and they have kind of a similar vibe, a similar feeling, but you definitely get more of like a, oh, this has more weight to the words that are maybe feeling made up, because there's definitely more citation of where maybe some of those things came from, even if the author has to say in the same part, like, hey, some of these situations may have been changed slightly, or I had to assume certain things about conversations.
Right. Right. And I was actually, we were talking about curious because I haven't finished this yet. Oh, interesting. Wow. Okay. Sorry, this made me think of it. So I bought this book, but I bought this book, I feel like 2 years ago now, but I think it's only been maybe a year and some change. But people are talking about how amazing this book was, but it is told in kind of a narrative format like that too, which kind of made me nervous. So I didn't really pick it back up despite liking the writing. And this guy seems to really know what he's talking about. I think he's actually local to me. Yeah, he's a professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And he wrote The Sewing Girl's Tale. I don't know if anybody's read this, but it's about the first ever grape, I think I have to say that because I'm live on TikTok, trial of a woman who actually sued a guy for it. And I was just curious, and this whole section is notes, and it's done by chapter. See, there's ways to do it. There's ways to do it for sure. And I'm glad you pointed that book out. I'll definitely add that to my list because that sounds fascinating. And I'll have to revisit that one. But yeah, the narrative stuff sometimes works for me, sometimes doesn't. Oh, Ashley's here. Christina.
Yeah, I went and grabbed just a random Eric Larson off the shelf because he writes narrative. He writes wonderful, lovely stories. And that's all of the sources.
I'm so glad you pointed that out, Christina. Now I'm curious about this. Oh, yep, this is also by chapter. Because I picked this up. So I buy stuff and don't read them, clearly. Ghosts of the Orphanage. I think I put this on Discord and people were wanting to check this out at some point. This is a good chunk of
at
the end too. And I just got the audiobook for this. It just became available. So anyway, I'm so glad you pointed that out because I would have never probably noticed until I had finished it. So
yeah,
Eric Larson is,
I would know nothing about buying a bunch of books you've never read. I've definitely read everything behind
what is
me.
that like?
But yeah, it's like you can tell a story and then say, like, in this chapter, when I get to the point where I'm saying, you know, a cloud of uncertainty, this is where I'm pulling this from. So, like, yeah, it was really frustrating. Because I'm like, I don't have an issue with your style. I have an issue with the fact that you're not actually telling me where any of this came from.
Sure.
And I mean, she even has in there this note that really that annoyed me because she's like, it's intended for those who want to further explore the arsenic trials and circumstances under which they occurred. But there's only like 4 things in here that are explicitly written out enough that I actually could find them.
I'd rather you just tell me about
just have to, I guess, look at the New York Times over a 3-year period and find the articles she might have used.
Yeah.
I'm guessing.
Yeah, I'd rather you just put it in your book and tell me.
I'm like, just make your book an extra 50 pages and tell me which New York Times articles you read so that I could also read them.
I also get nervous about Eric Larson because he's so ubiquitous that I'm like, is this actually good? You know?
I have enjoyed all of the stuff of his I've read.
I trust you. I've got The Devil in the White City. I think that's the only one I have.
Yeah. Well, and I think I started with one of the lesser known because it's the one that was like the invention of the Marconi machine and the person was like trying to get over to America to outrun murder charges. I can never remember what it's called. So it's like I didn't even start with like the one he's like the couple he's best known for, like, you know, Devil in the White City or The Gardens of, you know, Good and Evil. And
oh, and I do have that.
But at this point, I've found all of his books at used bookstores, so I now have them all. So I will be
And
reading
that's
them.
also that too, where it's like he's always being found at secondhand stores. Does that mean they're good? Does that mean like everybody had it? Does that mean people don't like it? I get so nervous about stuff like that. So good to hear. I'm glad that is a positive thing that I do own his books. Joanna.
The first Eric Larson book I read was Isaac Storm, and he starts out with too much narrative because he's talking about how Isaac walked out of his house and walked down to the beach and stood there and looked around. I'm thinking, this is bullshit. But he did, it's about a hurricane, so he consulted all these meteorological records from 1908 or 1905 or whenever it was. And so at least when he is saying he was down on the beach, he was able to say things like the wind was coming in at such and such miles an hour, and waves were splashing and blah blah. And but so anyway, what I'm saying is that Isaac Storm book did annoy me at first, but I've pretty much read everything else he's read. And I don't know why they're all in used bookstores. They're just extraordinarily good, really good. And the one about the Marconi is Thunderstruck, I think. Yeah? Okay, cool. Anyway, that was all I had.
Right. I've had a cat hair in my mouth like for the past hour. Oh my god, I got it. Okay. Anyway, I have not even heard of Isaac Storm. So I will be also adding that to my list. Thunderstruck I have seen. I need to catch up on my Eric Larson. What am I doing? Greatest criminal chases of all time. Hell yeah. And he's still writing a whole bunch. I mean, this just came out. This those Split It in the Vial. Yeah, that was only a couple of years ago.
I think he also just did his first fiction book. That's released as an audio only because they said that the whole experience was part of the book.
Hell yeah. I love that. Huh. Sorry. Now I'm getting, oh my god, something came up, and what on earth is that? I'll have to screenshot this. Put it in the Discord. What am I looking at? Anyway, anybody else? Last minute thoughts? Anybody wanted to share their thoughts on the book? Before we hop into palette cleanser time, because we've been chatting for about an hour, which is typically how it works. Cool. I will say before we go and before I end the recording and stop the live on TikTok, next month we are reading We Carry Their Bones by Erin Kimmerl. I gotta look up how to say her name because I keep butchering it every time I bring up this book. If you have read The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead, this is the nonfiction version of that book. The Search for Justice at the Dozer School of Boys. I've heard nothing but incredible things about it. It's fairly short. It doesn't look like a very chunky book. It does have pictures, which I know people love. Wow, like very intricate, detailed pictures. Let's see. It is around 215 pages, and wow. The appendix, by the way, has a list of names of the positively identified boys and men, and then there's abbreviations, which also helps. And then let's see, Christopher Bryan. About this much of, now that we're on the topic, the bibliography part about it. Good section, good stuff. Anyway, so that is what we're reading next. I would share my screen to show you what else we're reading for the upcoming months, but I'm scared to do that again. So it is located on our Discord. It is on our Instagram. future books. I can kind of just say them out loud, but I know that doesn't help. So yeah, August, We Carry Their Bones. September is What the Dead Know by Barbara Butcher. I have not purchased this just yet. October is Killers of the Flower Moon to get ready for the movie that comes out. And November and December have not been decided just yet. We will get to those probably in September. So very excited to read those with you guys. And I would also love to know what else y'all have been reading. I'm going to cut the recording